So now we want to talk a little bit about how to get branding and performance put together. So that's obviously not easy, and it's more there's like no clear recipe of how to do that. So we're doing that kind of as a live experiment here today. Mete has agreed to do that.
I'm the rabbit that jumps out of the hat. Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know whether he was 100% clear to him on how this is going to play out, and that he's actually agreed to this, because Mete is part of a traditional media agency. Yeah, and that's cross media. I'm not the biggest fan of media agencies.
Just to set the tone of the next.
Just to set the
tone of the next
on
hour.
stage. No, but I think one thing is why I often say that. I'm not saying that because I don't like media agencies per se, but I think that a lot of startups should at least build a lot more in-house competence than that has been the traditional case in traditional marketing departments. But I think if you look at what marketing departments in startups look like, what they often neglect is what you guys exactly do. So trying to focus on the brand building piece and being consistent in communication. So I think learning from each other makes an awful lot of sense. Yeah? Because I think even if you look at organizations like Booking.com, that are excellent on performance marketing, I would say if you look at this from a brand building perspective, it's not great. And what I believe that if you nail the combination of the two, so really trying to be a brand-conscious performance marketeer, that is something that's extremely powerful, because not a lot of people know how to do this properly and are able to execute on this. Because what you often find is you either have marketing departments that are too brand-driven and too little data-driven, in the sense of what I would say real data. I mean, they claim to be data-driven, but they're not really if you look under the hood. And on the other hand of the spectrum, you have people that are more quantitative driven and are working on performance marketing, but neglect the brand side of things. And I think trying to get that together, that's why we want to open the stage for Mete and basically have him talk about what a real brand looks like, also and how normal brands work on this, and then try to get the angle back to the startup world and basically say, what can we learn from this? When is actually the time to think in this way? And I think that's a very good exercise. And that's not easy, and that's why and it will be different for every company. But I think sharpening your thinking in this, I think, will be helpful and sensibilizing you for this, that you need both. And you've seen it probably also, I don't know who saw the case study Danielle showed and the communications team with Contorion. We invested quite a lot into producing a high-quality video for Contorion, and that has really driven a lot of engagement and also looks very good on the ROI perspective in the short term. So I think, and if you listen to the Alibaba guy this morning very carefully, you see like the combination of content and traditional brand building and performance. That's really the key. And I think the key element here is, and you're going to talk about that also, is the customer journey. Yeah? Because if you think about marketing really driving people through the customer journey in the sense of attention, interest, desire, and action, the old AIDA model you probably learned if you've been to business school, I think, and if you understand that branding is probably more in the attention bit and the interest bit, and desire and action is probably more in the performance bit, you understand that branding and performance is not so much a contradiction or separate kind of things, but it's actually part of the same customer journey. But I would hand over the mic, not really the mic, you have the mic already, so to Mete, who's running Cross Media's office here in Berlin.
Yeah.
And you deal with a lot of large clients, so you really know what you're talking about. You're also doing that already since a couple of years, so didn't start yesterday.
No,
so,
not at all.
The floor is yours, and I will jump in when I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, I hope I can offer at least a springboard that makes sense. Thank you very much for having me here. As a representative of the young, as you mentioned, like the yin and yang, the performance and the brand perspective that you try to bring together today. And I completely agree with you. It's a case of learning from each other instead of opposing each other, and it's about bringing things together that belong together to get a good result at the end in front of the client. Just, does it work? Maybe no. Yeah, just a short who I am. I'm Mete Atam, unit director here in Cross Media Berlin. I've spent like roughly about 15 years in various kinds of agencies. That can be creative agencies, that can be branding agencies, communication strategy, and now I'm in media. So I think I can bring a little bit of at least experience to the table. Maybe just in a nutshell, what is the shop that I'm from? Founded 20 years ago at the first digital-focused media agency, and so far we're not that far away, Florian. We're still independent, which is quite important in the media business because it's run by 80% of the market is dominated by the global networks, the big bad companies, and we are still the independent alternative to it. We're the only agency with transparency report, which is, if you follow the discussions in media, quite interesting because we have a big discussion about intransparency and fraud and whatsoever. So we try to not be in that discussion by saying we are open to everything. Full service means all media, means paid, owned, earned without worknet. Not too much detail into that one. We have 3 offices in Germany, 3 in the States, and now freshly built up 1 in London. And we are active and run in 40 countries with about 470 million euros that we are to spend for clients. So, but today we are talking about growth. The point was how to build brands, or can brands drive growth? So we have to balance the yin and yang about the trade-off between branding and performance view and marketing. And yeah, let's see what it can contribute. The abstract concept of brand. The concept of brand itself is huge, so we won't focus on everything today. So I won't tell you how to really go into crafting a brand and what's all involved in that. That's a story that goes way beyond what we can tell today. So I'd rather focus on how to bring those both views in terms of marketing and media together, maybe based rather on spending or on activation, on being active, and less on what is the creative side of a brand, what is the really deep dive content heart of a brand. I give a short glimpse on it, but I won't jump deeply into it. I think that would be too much today. So if you look about brand and how it can drive growth, there's one big example in the last years. I won't give you a deep dive into the story of Apple. It's just because in the research I stumbled about that sentence from that guy from Forbes that I find quite fitting in terms of brand value is the ultimate currency craved by companies. A valuable brand spurs demand and creates pricing power. That fits quite good because if we talk about growth, in that context we can say growth is more of profit or sold units, or in best case both. And if we then come back to the story of yin and yang about brand and activation, it's very likely to say, well, more unit goes with more activation, with sales promotion or whatsoever, but what really drives the profit or the price of a unit, there you might go for the brand. And often it's regarded as opposites. But I think the art of it is bringing those two into balance. When to use what for which purpose. So we call that one in our agency balanced brand activation. First of all, to explain the concept, I want to go shortly into what is a brand and how to build it, how to activate it, when to activate it, and how to balance the brand and the activation part of things, and what's the perfect mix. So first, let's see what a brand is, or an approach to what a brand could be. Let's start with a customer. Customer meets you, or your services, or your product in many ways. You get in touch either by a review or by your website. It could be ads, it could be opinions of other people, or friends. It can be the usage after purchase. It can be a service experience, can be being in touch with your employees, or like here in a party, can be many ways. The important thing is, what does the customer think, feel, and tell about you after you came along at those touch points? Brand is a mutual thing. Brands are relations shaped by the experience the customer has with your service, with your product, with your ads, whatever your logo is on, that forms his perception of your brand. And not only the experience, but also the exceptions that come with it. So if you think about building a brand, you start defining the experiences and expectations. So how to do it? How to build a brand? Easy trick, ask Google. Google comes up with 36 million answers. There are a lot of it. An approach that I found quite effective and very simple, and that's at the heart of many brand models that exist out there, is what Simon Sinek described as the gold circle. I won't show you a video here. Google it, it's good, especially the short form, about 3 minutes 50, where it comes to the essence of it. I think if you look at it, you get the basics of how to build a brand. The point is,
it's a TED talk, right? It's a TED talk.
It's a TED talk, yeah. And he built a media imperium out of it. So quite a clever marketing guy too. There was this model works basically like this. There's a layer of what, so that's your product, what you do, how you do it, how your product is, how your experience should be. That's just more the how, the experience layer. But the core to it is why you do it. What is the story that you tell to people? What is the story that your brand tells? So on the key, or the secret of all is, you tell it inside out. You don't tell it, my product does this, and the experience you can expect is this, and I do it because I want to sell money. No, you tell it the other way around, and then it starts making sense. That's the core of, in terms of many times referred to, your story, your mission, your purpose. There are many names for it. Just to boil it down, I just brought 4 to just give an example. Small unknown brands like Apple, they said, well, everything we do, we challenge the status quo, therefore the famous claim, think different. Or Nike, nice one, we want to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Side note, if you have a body, you're an athlete, so they sold to everybody. Google, I think, was well known here to make the world's information universally accessible and useful, and not sell as much AdWords as possible. And or Spotify, one of our clients, give people access to all the music they want all the time in a completely legal and accessible way. So this just as a rough feeling for what's at the inner part of a brand that you can later activate. The important thing is branding is more than marketing. Of course, it's a big role in marketing, but it affects also your investor relations, your employer brand, other stakeholders, business partners. It affects the whole way of your way of doing business. Mm-hmm. So, but today, also, as I don't want to give a comprehensive course of everything regarding branding, we want to focus on the market side.
Probably one thing I'd like to add here, or like to comment, and I think because we often discuss when does it make sense for startups to take a look at these kind of things. And I think answering these 3 questions in the beginning and having a just ask yourself, or the founders of the company, or if you're the founder yourself, can you give a good answer to these questions? Because you think it's like nothing, but I think if you talk to a lot of startup companies, the answer that you'll get is not satisfactory, especially on the why. Yeah? I mean, a lot of people, they get to a certain point in terms of revenue without having answered these questions. And you don't need that, because it's like, if you are, for example, an Amazon arbitrage business, you can be a $25 million company, or euro company, it doesn't really matter these days, without having answered these questions properly. But I think if you really want to build a proper company out of it, this will become relevant sooner or later. And that doesn't mean making a big market research with like answering 5,000 consumers, etc. Just answering, I think these questions, I don't know how you normally do that, but my feeling is you can even do that in your team or in your company without, I mean, you could have a facilitator from an agency or whatever, but that tells you, you know, this is probably not a mission, or this is probably not something, a why or purpose that will not carry you so far. But I think that is something, if one thing I would do in branding, or in terms of branding, early on, is answering these questions. And then probably one more question, that is to whom. Yeah? So basically, which you kind of have in here, where you basically say that the target group, which is kind of in here when you
especially
have to,
focus on the market side.
When you have the consumer. But that is something, I think that's an exercise I would recommend that everybody should do that. And you don't need that, unfortunately, to do Google AdWords, but I think Dorothy can speak quite a lot about it. I mean, you're also, like, a lot of times, not complaining, you wouldn't complain, but a lot of times we work with marketing teams is that we basically see that these questions have not been answered in a satisfactory way. And that's also part of branding, yeah? And it's not very esoteric, I think. So I think that's definitely something every company, also B2B. That's like the great thing, because a lot of B2B companies, you'd say like store to B, why should I answer these questions? It's like, you know, I'm selling B2B, I'm selling to rational consumers or rational buyers, but I don't know in how many B2B purchasing decisions you've been in. Also, these processes heavily depend on storytelling. Yeah, so the concept of the rational B2B buyer is just bullshit if you have been in B2B buying situations. So even there, I think the storytelling, and if you look at, for example, Alexander Graf, what they're doing at Spryker, he's a master in storytelling, and how they've shifted their storytelling until it really fits. I think answering those questions in the beginning really makes sense. Sorry, Mete, but I thought that fits in here quite well.
Yeah, on this slide, in the footnote, there's already says Florian, as we talked before. That's your point to jump in. Yeah. Okay, so let's dive back into balanced brand activation. Now we had just a glimpse on what is brand, but how to activate it, and especially when to activate it. Because, of course, at the beginning, you don't invest your money in brand and your time and your efforts. You first start with a product, with the experience you want to bring across. Start with the marketing and try to activate people that are quite close to your product at the moment. You go for direct response activations. You go rather in a rather rational messaging, like you find it very often. We have the solution for that and that problem, because it's very close to the other pitches that you have. It's very common that those pitches go out to customers as well. They're easy to measure and in an iterative optimization possible. You focus on ROMI. You put SEA in place, performance media, email direct, or affiliate marketing. Everything is good at that stage. But there's a problem. You iterate, you get better, but you will come to some kind of border limit of activation effectiveness. The better you get, the smaller your incremental growth will be. That's a problem that we often come across, and then then our answer sometimes is not that what people want to hear, because it says, well, you have to continue to grow, you need a new layer, you need to go into the upper funnel, and there the laws and the rules change. So instead of try to convert better, so making from 10 prospects 1.3 to 1.4 clients, you have to say, well, forget about the point anything. You have to make from 10 to 100 people that you then can convert. And so you have to take another approach into your marketing. You have to get more prospects to convert. So as I said, different layer, different rules. There's a big important study of two old advertising guys, Peter Field and Les Binet. They worked themselves through an enormous database in the last 10 years or so. The database is the Institute for Practitioners in Advertising. It's an organization like 100 years old. They provide tools and knowledge for marketing communication specialists. And their studies were very well renowned, very well perceived. They tried to answer the questions, what are the ingredients of marketing effectiveness on the short term and on the long term? And there's again this yin and yang thing, performance versus branding, short term, long term, emotional, rational. So they dig themselves through around about 1,000 campaigns with 700 brands and 83 categories. The special thing about this database is that it's filled with all kinds of very relevant data. Campaign type, campaign durations, marketing and campaign goals, the respective budgets, the share of the market that the brands had to the time, the share of voice, so how much was their ad spend compared to the spend of other competitors. What are the price KPIs? What are the brand KPIs? What are the business KPIs? So it's a huge set to dive into. And they compiled very interesting points out of it, which I want to present you today as an orientation. So first, before we go into that, what was their sense of effectiveness? Now it gets a little bit mathematic. I hope I can keep it as low as possible. Brands tend to grow if they spend more than their market share is. Share of voice is bigger than share of market. That's no overall rule, but an observation that it works. So that upfront. So an effective campaign is your gain in market share is more than the difference of share of voice and share of market. So if your money just works better than the other ones, so in easy terms. So this is their definition of effectiveness. And this is also a definition of effectiveness that's good for you because you have to look on your money. You can't overspend. You want to spend your money as smart as possible, and therefore you want to know how to spend it. So basically you have two ways of going into the marketing route. Like you said, Florian, you can either go for the rational messaging, we are better, please buy us, there's 50% rebate, or you go on the emotional route and then try to tell a story, a convincing story of get people by their hearts and opinions, and they have two big differences. The one is fast, striking, with an immediate effect, but it also decays very quickly and is gone in a second. And you have this emotional priming, which has that big effect in the moment, but it builds a depot. So if you repeat it a couple of times, then you can have something like the following graph. On the rational side, you communicate, it falls down, up, down, up, down, up, down, but you stay in the corridor. If you have the emotional brand building, you add up. And that's important on the long term, and it will be important for building long-term profit. Also, if you go for the emotions and for the emotional route, they drive the long-term price elasticity. And that's the point when we had our formula before, more price and more units, that's the point where you drive prices. If you are able that your average selling price is like 500 times higher, if you sell your unit for $800 than your fiercest competitor, then you're at Apple versus Samsung. So that's a good example on how much the love for the brand can affect your wallet.
But I think, can I add one thing here? Because
Yeah.
I think the one thought here that's very interesting. I think what this is based on, and this is actually, if you look at a lot of CPG brands, I don't know how you would think about it, but I think a lot of the products in the CPG category and their branding perception is built by media. Yeah? Because if you look at diapers, yeah, the functional superiorness of Pampers versus DM, and I have 4 kids, the DM private label brand is simply not existent. I mean, the DM private label brand is just as good as a diaper as Pampers is, but they can still charge more, so that reflects what you say here. But that's not because of functional superiority of Pampers, but it's just based on communication, or on Roger Federer having a contract with not Pampers, obviously, but somebody else.
You never know what contracts Roger Federer has. He has a lot.
Absolutely. I don't know who's managing that guy, but it's the the one thing, although, that I wanted to point out here, and I think that's probably something that's very relevant, is what you said earlier in the context of experiences. But because I think the major difference, and Apple fits right into this, is that you can substitute marketing, media-based marketing, with experiences like Apple does. Because I think a lot of what Apple has done has not relied solely on media,
No.
but mainly on the experience they've created. And I think one great number that I always take a look at it and use as an example, Zalando's marketing cost ratio, so the marketing cost divided by the revenue, is 10% today. That's a lot lower than it used to be, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be profitable. But Amazon today has like 3.2 or something, yeah? So significantly lower. And their strategy is basically, we create a better experience by providing Amazon Prime shopping experience, shipping experience, but also the whole Amazon Video and Amazon Music exercise is nothing but a CRM method to drive basically the initial marketing cost down. And I think that's something, I think if we're talking about this year, this focuses very much on the media brand creation in a certain way. And I think the cool thing about digital businesses is that you often can substitute media marketing or media-based marketing with product and experience-based marketing. And the one thing is that I like most about this is this depot effect is definitely there. Yeah? So, and I think it makes sense to have it in mind in your media communication. But what you have to have in mind even more is if you create a superior product and create a superior experience, you're not only having a depot effect, it's basically a cumulative building of a brand. And that's a big difference. So if you have a smart idea on how to create a product in a better way or a service in a better way, you're not even underlying a depot effect, which still sees a decay. I mean, what you're arguing, and I think that's 100% correct, if you argue in a rational way, in media communication, your depot effect is low. It gets higher the more emotional you get. But I would argue that's 100% true. So in your communication, you have to find the right balance between rational and emotional. But what's even better, if you are able, like a Spotify or like Google, or to create an experience, then that is an even better substitute. Yeah, because you have any underlying depot effect. The only thing that you have is your competitor that's possibly providing a better experience. So, but I think that is something that you really need to balance if you're in digital business, is how much can you achieve through media communication, how much can you through experience, and also then you have this strange element of price. Yeah, so that comes in. And I think if you look at a lot of marketing approaches today, I don't know how structured your place is, but a lot of people, and I don't know, you are usually talking to the media department, I guess, or the marketing department. But it's the complexity that you have a network of things that are all interdependent. So if you just optimize media on a shitty product, it doesn't help you. No. If you optimize media on a way out of the market price product, it doesn't help you. And I think what you guys need to understand for your business, are the sensitivities of investment? What do I mean by that? Is it better to invest in price, in the sense of lowering the price? Is it better to invest in a media-based communication that probably should be more emotional than your intuition would be? Because if you only look at short-term ROI, you would, and that's what most startups do, yeah? Or should I invest in product experience? Because that's probably in the midterm or the long term the most efficient. If you are Pampers, you cannot invest in that, yeah? Because how can you differentiate on a diaper? But in a lot of digital businesses, you can. And I think that is something, this holistic understanding of these are the things I can turn on and what is their effect. And I think most of the marketing departments I at least talk to, they are just in the media sphere. If you're lucky, then the media sphere plus the CRM sphere, yeah. So that's another dimension. But very few marketeers think in terms of price, think in terms of experience. I mean, that's a discussion we often have. That is like people expect us as marketeers. I'm now talking in the us. to solve their shitty product problems. Yeah? And that is simply not possible. And that's probably also a big difference. You are often talking to people that have built a basic understanding or a basic product that you can sell with media. Yeah? The problem is that in a lot of startups, and that's what I always urge people, I would only go into the media-based communications mode once you've shown with your product on a smaller scale that it's actually worth selling. Yeah? And I think that's a big advantage that you have as a startup. If Procter & Gamble does a product launch of a new product based on market research, they spend 5 million on media right away. If NU3...
Add another zero behind it and you're coming close to it.
Okay. So 50 million euros, and that's just probably Germany. And that's
and just diapers.
and that's crazy, yeah? So NU3 can do a similar thing for 100,000 euros, and what we've seen there is, and many others, you just start putting media on this the moment you feel that it actually works on a smaller scale, and I think that's where, and then media can be very effective, and I think that's one of the things, I think a lot of the traditional media rules work once you have a good product market fit.
Yeah.
That's the moment when you start doing communication, and I think that's why it's also often premature. That's why, for example, I would not recommend TV commercials for an early stage startup. That's not good on the monetization side, but only once you've really found out that you have a good product market fit.
Yeah, that's what, back to that point at this stage, get your product right, because there's nothing, there's no better way to kill a bad product than good advertising. Gives the promise, and you can't keep the promise, nobody will come back to you. So, and yes, you have to scale investments. If you go in the upper funnel layer, you don't want to throw the entire money out of the window. Yeah. Okay.
But still, I think this is a very important thing. So, because what the discussion also, Dimitri, that we had, like, in a sense.
This one you said just
no, show this upper funnel again.
Okay.
Upper funnel. So sooner or later, you have to move in here, and that's going to get shitty expensive. Yeah, and I think there's two elements that is important. By then, you should have to have understood the customer journey, and by then you must have optimized this product here, because the better this works down here, the more room you have to maneuver up here, and because you often get from people, for us, it's just search and Facebook and retargeting that works. Yeah. That's not an answer. Yeah? If you want to grow, and we're not investing in companies, unfortunately we are investing in companies that stay down here, but that should not be the initial ambition. The initial ambition has to be, sooner or later, we have to be good enough to move up here. Yeah? And there's no way out of it. And the answer of a marketing person to say, no, SEA is the only thing that works, then you haven't tried hard enough. Yeah? That's not an answer. If your product isn't worth going up here, you must do something on the product, on your attribution, on your CRM, whatever, yeah? Because otherwise you're going to stay a little shitty, irrelevant company, yeah? And that's the only way. And the other thing is, if you have a way to move up here, that can be a big competitive advantage. Yeah, if you consider a lot of the businesses that are now IPOing or have been IPOing out of Germany, Zalando, Trivago, why have they? For them, in a lot of cases, the ability to move up here at massive scale has been a major differentiator. And so not trying this hard enough is not acceptable. And I think and the question is, when is the right moment to start? Yeah. So it's not an easy solution. You cannot start with a shitty product, do TV advertising. But sooner or later, you have to be able to go mass market. Obviously not in B2B. And I think that is something, the ultimate goal has to be moving up here. Yeah.
Yep. So that's the database stuff. So effectiveness. Shortly spent smarter than the other guys. So, okay, we had this one, and we had, I think, that one too on here. Okay, so the emotional route is more promising, but it takes more time. It has comparable effects within a year, and I know you're in many cases very time sensitive, but you see the big steps come after 2 or 3 years, according to the studies of Field and Binet.
Mete, has there been an analysis of how much minimum spend you have to have had?
Nope.
Okay. Because that would be
Because
interesting.
but it varies then from industry, situation, product,
Okay.
market size, whatsoever. So they've aggregated it on a very large scale. So if you look at the dimensions of the axis, total number of very large effects is not a really exact KPI, I have to assume. But otherwise, if you have a study about 83 different industry sectors or whatsoever, and 10 years, 1,000 campaigns, maybe they all don't really pay into the same set of KPIs, so please excuse me at that point. Okay, so another point is another paradigm shift to lower funnel activities is you go for reach, you go for mass. You don't go for one-to-one. You not only target your existing customers or only new customers, you target the whole market. That's way more effective than you say, well, I just choose a certain group in the early stage. That's what I recommend. So, as a summary, the upper funnel has its own rules in terms of its long-term versus short-term. It's rather emotional than a rational approach in a lower funnel. It has a broad targeting except to a dedicated retargeting strategy that you can really drive in dedicated online media. And it's slower but bigger effects. So what's the perfect mix is now the question. For maximum profit and efficiency, you need both types. So it's not an either-or question, but it's both combined. It's also for efficiency, you need both. Interesting is sales activation is not the most efficient part in the upper funnel. Balance is very important, as well as effective. Balance is important to effectiveness. So if you compare those both curves, they just both have roughly their maximum at 40%, which then adds up the perfect mix is about, according to their studies, go with 60% of your budget in brand and 40% in activation, media or measures. It's not saying that, it's not that I say spend 60% in TV, but 60% on creating your brand and sharing it with many people. It can be building your whole experiences. It must not necessarily be media as you refer to, but it can be the product, the service experience, it can be measures around it, it can be content, it can be anything that adds up to your branded experience. So the big question now is how to bring yin and yang together. We say, okay, 60% of your energy goes in the upper funnel, 40 in the lower funnel. So how do we bring those in line in one customer journey? So let's see, you talk to people, so let's try to segment the audience and the media selection by funnel stage. First of all, you have the broad reach. You want to achieve presence, you want to achieve preference for your brand and your product. Then, on the border between upper and lower funnel, then you say, well, here's trust and consideration important, because you want to drive people down the funnel where you can convert them. So they need to trust you, and they need to at least consider you in their decision making. And then at the end, when they're close in their decisions, then you target them and really retarget them to activate the sales. So what does this mean in terms of channels? Of course, you will use channels according to their strengths. Branding channels will look likely to look different than activation channels. It's just roughly, it's not 100% comprehensive, but of course, TV is the branding tool that exists at the moment. Out of home can work as good, but does not have that long ad stock that TV can provide. TV, but online videos in the later phases. Online video is also very much strength, depending on product, on target group, on situation. So it's already pushing up close to TV. In combination, they work great. TV, by the way, and the last one to it, TV works great in combination with search and then drive to web. That's the best thing in the upper funnel media to really bring people to the web is TV, obviously. I mean, what do you do when you're watching TV? Okay, print is good for some cases, not always. It's a bit expensive and it's a bit slow. Cinema can be very impressive, especially for younger target groups. As soon as you start having kids, you don't have time for cinema again. So,
Haven't been to cinema for 10 years. Yeah, exactly
No?
for that reason.
why cinema when you have Netflix? You don't need a
That's true.
babysitter for it. Okay, now then we have online video, online display. Yes, has its strengths, has a couple of weaknesses. And then we come to social media. The representative here is Facebook, could be Snapchat or whatsoever. And I think that is the turning point where you say, well, this is rather branding oriented or rather activation performance oriented media. Of course, you have digital media in the performance realm. You have radio, which is still a very good activation video, and you have search. So you want to try to map this into your customer journey. The very basic one, customer level, there's a wish or a need or something. I feel like I could buy a new set of sneakers or whatsoever. You go into information phase, then you have the evaluation phase, and last action phase. So then you apply the basic funnel logic, communication goals beneath it, awareness, consideration, intention, and action. And then you see how the both funnel phases come together. So first, in the red, rather 60% realm, you have this strategic media like the big shots, TV, online video, out of home, and print. Then in the consideration phase, you go either into special interest, SEA comes already in here, SEO. The more you walk into the evaluation phase, then you have mailings, you have content marketing, like the video production workshop that was before, where it sits then here in the later phase, trying to get the attention towards the consideration, then to activate people, to educate them more, to gain their trust, to really get their consideration, and then, well, the hard performance measures kick in.
Mete, can I just one remark here, or two remarks here, which one thing I think that's really important. I think when you look at where does a lot of the performance gains comes from, or the ROI comes from, it's not from overall planning, but it's from small-scale optimization on a daily basis. That's here. Yeah? So, and one thing that I would really recommend, and I think that's one of our major criticisms of the media agency experiences I had so far, is that if you move here, TV, things like that, if you work with a Group M, let's say, probably not with you guys, but Group M, they do optimization every 3-4 weeks, yeah, of their TV campaigns. So not very frequent. They rather have a flight for 2 weeks, and then they look at it afterwards. And and if you think about it, if a lot of the performance that you actually get, or the ROI, comes from a daily small-scale optimization, you know, this keyword I changed the ad, here I changed the landing page, and I do it on a really highly frequent basis, then the question is, how can we replicate that principle here? Because I would say a small-scale optimization would also bring a lot of performance here as well, or a lot of ROI. And so what I think you can do is, obviously it's not possible to measure the performance here the same way you do it here. But I think what definitely makes sense, let me come. So, but what I think is definitely something that you should think about, and Trivago does it, I think you guys probably are doing it also, that you look at short-term indicators here, you know, like how many visits you have during your commercial during that time frame, then you follow on these visits. So you measure direct performance here, yeah, also of TV. Out of home, it's a little more difficult, but you can also try to replicate it with other things. So, and I think you look at the direct performance, and you still optimize based on the direct performance, but you acknowledge that obviously the share of the direct performance of the total performance in these channels is lower than it is here. I mean, if you think about, I always try to differentiate between total performance, indirect performance plus direct performance equals total performance. Yeah? And I would say that the share of total performance or the share of direct performance of total performance in these channels here is a lot higher than it is here. Yeah? So if you only look at the direct performance, the completeness of the picture that you get for the channels here is a lot fuller than it is here. But I think if you acknowledge that, that's completely fine, but it still helps you to basically say, oh, Germany's Next Top Model is obviously a good format for me, versus, weiß nicht, ob Vera Mittag, gibt's das noch? Vera, ich gucke so viel Fernsehen. Vera Mittag, it's not, yeah? So, and what I would urge everybody to, I know it's imperfect, but if you don't do it, you create a lot of diffusity in marketing performance. I think if you do everything, I would force your marketing department to work on the same set of KPIs across every channel. That does not mean basically, so, and here you have to do that with assumptions, obviously, right? So here you have to assume that of my total performance that I'm going to get on the TV commercial, only 10% I can see directly. Yeah? Then you have to work with a multiplier here. Yeah? So basically acknowledging, because what you see right now...
I think this is the important point. If you say you have the same set of KPIs in place, but you have to insert some kind of correction, because a TV spot does not have the same effect like a performance-based thing, because it lasts much longer. It has this long-term effect. Therefore, you have those big short media normally implies in the flighting strategy with breaks where you look at the ad stock, then it goes down to a certain level, then you have a short reminder flight to bring it up or keep it in level. While in the later stages, you have continuous flows. Therefore, they work on a different level, they work differently. So if you apply the same set of KPIs, you have to insert some way to bring them back.
But 100% agreed, but I think if you don't do that, I mean, I think it makes 100% sense to like insert some kind of factor and you make that factors better. Yeah, I mean, that's what media mix modeling is actually about. Using statistics, etc., to become better in assessing this effect. Yeah? So that is like the key thing, and that can be a key differentiator. But I think if you don't do that, if you don't measure it all on the same KPIs, because it's not a question of what's perfect or is that the correct model. The question is what's the alternative. And I think if the alternative is measuring this by certain KPIs and this by a different set of KPIs, what happens? And this is exactly what happens even at a place like Zalando. If you ask the CMO, you get 100 euros. Where do you put it? And he cannot give you a consistent answer. And that's what I'm criticizing about like the Omnicoms and the Group M's of this world. If you ask them, you get 1,000 euros more, where do I put the money? And then you get a shitty answer. Yeah? That is somehow diffuse. And that's what drives me mad or has driven me. So because I think you have to acknowledge that the only way you can do this is having a consistent set of KPIs. Here, they're a lot more assumption-driven, unfortunately, and you have to work on getting better and better in the assumptions. And here, as the share of total performance you can see in the direct performance is higher, it's obviously more correct. And I know it's not perfect, but it's for some psychological reason, people have a problem basically saying, oh, this is assumption-driven, so this is not correct, so I have to apply different KPIs. So wait a minute. So you're applying different KPIs here than you do here, so that's complete bollocks. Yeah? So my alternative is, I acknowledge that it's not perfect, but it's much better doing this, and then you work on the model. It's also 100% agreed. It's not the alternative to say, I apply the same KPIs in the exact same way, because otherwise what's going to happen? You stick to the lower funnel, because the lower funnel will always look better. And even
it's always easy to measure and easy to optimize.
And that doesn't help you because you will not grow. And that's exactly the same reason actually within TV, why do a lot of startups, it's actually quite funny. If you look at how do startups do media on TV, they often basically stay within like the time frame between 14 to 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Why? Because the direct effect looks cheaper that you get there. Yeah. So if you only apply this kind of thinking, you'll never do prime time. Yeah, you'll never do prime time because you'll stick to shitty stations like Eurosport, etc.
Amount of spots per given money. And
exactly.
Not taking into account that you can have a lot of spots at night and nobody watches it. So what's the worth of a single spot?
So and even if you have a direct effect, you have to come up to an understanding that basically say, okay, is Germany's next top model. It's very expensive, but it still makes sense to do it. But I would still urge everybody that wants to engage in this, coming up with an holistic understanding, and rather work with modeling here, because you need to work your way into this here. Yeah? If you only calculate those in a bad way, it helps you short term, because short term your ROI looks better, but it will limit you in your growth. Yeah? And then that's a thing. But that's
But
probably
still, one problem is here in the upper funnel, things take longer and need more effort. We just have made some similar exercise for a client for us. We put a modeling system into place, which spans right now for almost a year or even 1.5 years. And in this modeling, we put into account his spending behavior, the spending behavior of the competitors, the effects of the weather on the footfall in the shops, because it's a retailer, and whatever you can imagine out there. So it's a model of, 60 to 80 variables. And then after 1 year, we are able to make prognosis into the future, to say, well, is it better in terms of brand building to go into TV or stick with out-of-home media only and have a higher share of digital media? Or what would be the effects on a web shop if we would go for this and this? So it takes time, but then you can put models into place where you really can make scenarios within some given boundaries. But of course, we're in the upper funnel, it takes time. It's not like you can A/B test AdWords more or less on a daily basis.
Yeah. But there is some experiences that were made in the past, what those factors should look like. Yeah? So, and then you orientate yourself at the lower end of those benchmarks, and then you're okay. Yeah? But I think it's the message that's really important is not spending on branding is also not the solution. Yeah? But
no brand is no solution too.
Yeah.
That's true. So that's the last chart, just to say, to sum things up, how can things work together in a cosmos? Because it's not either or, it's bringing the world together. So normally, if you go into mass media, if you scale, you go in mass media on a flighting pattern base to get a broad reach and broad awareness to people. And then you will, hopefully, especially with TV, it works good. Drive up your SEA budgets to the same time that you really have a good drive to web. If you have them on your website, you can educate them, you can give them more information that you can give in any advertising, and of course you can start to track them. If you have them into your tracking, then you can also use like performance measures, retargeting stuff to get them. You have the programmatic possibilities to get them, and so you have them in a kind of at least performance activation loop. So in our both funnel perspectives, you have here the upper funnel. The lower funnel would rather sit here, and hopefully they buy at the end of the day from you. Thank you. Was a long thing. A lot of graphs. I wanted to bring 10 key takeouts today, and then I think we're done. Branding can drive growth. Branding means defining the experience with you, your company, your product. Therefore, it needs to be thought of from the beginning, and not if you say, well, maybe we should add we should invest in some fancy TV spots. What is your mission? What is your reason to be? What is the takeout the people should have when they met you and your product? Branding, pricing power, coexists with activation, sales promotion. It's not an either or, it's a yin and yang, it's going together. Although the mechanics and the rules are some kind of contradictory. But a 60 to 40 rule brings optimal results if you combine them, at least to the studies of those guys. You have to keep in mind that you have a different targeting technique to your target groups or to people, depending on the funnel stage the people are in. You will differentiate your media channels by the respective goals that you have in those funnel stages. You need to orchestrate your brand and activation measures within your communication mix. And when in doubt, call either me or Florian. Thank
Yep.
you.
Cool. Any questions?
questions?
Because we still have some time. Or any remarks?
Go ahead there.
5 minutes?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I think the model should be a little bit kind of altered when you talk about subscription businesses. I think the model works probably quite good for business where you have a one-time sell and then hope that the client comes back. Also, what I was kind of missing with the branding tools, I think stores are a great branding tool. And you even had it on your picture with the Apple Store. And also events and stuff like that, I would see as branding tools that are not covered here. And then I have a question. I don't know if you follow Scott Galloway. Probably you do. He has a theory that brands will be dead once voice search or voice is growing, and as it is growing in the US quite nicely. That would be my question. What would you advise here? I mean, you mentioned it, Florian. Pampers cannot do much about the product experience. If media is dying and there is no way of differentiating, you know what I mean. How do you build a brand for like Pampers if you order diapers through Alexa?
So it's a broad range of questions.
Sorry.
No problem. Because finally they all fall together. First, no, I didn't. Yes, I didn't explicitly mention shops or anything like that because I didn't want to go into detailed discussion about it. That's all in the part of brand experience. Any touch points. That was the little list that I presented before. Of course, trade fairs, events, also sponsoring of some whatsoever could be interesting and relevant, and of course shops. So it's about creating the brand experience, and I think even in times of voice, I think I don't know exactly what this guy what his arguments are, but I kind of disagree at the moment because it's the experience that sticks, the name that comes with it. And I mean, if you imagine yourself in front of a shelf of yogurts, and every yogurt would look the same, you have no picture, what would you do? Would you go ask for, oh, I want to have the Landliebe, or I'd rather have the Weinstefan, or just the Große Bauer, or whatsoever?
Well, if I'm in front of the shelf, but if I tell my Alexa or whatever, hey, I need batteries, and then Amazon ships me the Amazon batteries and doesn't ask, hey, do you want an Energizer or do you want water or whatever? But they just ship it to me, so the experience is there through the shipment, and I have the batteries within 24 hours, and it doesn't matter what kind of brand is behind it.
I mean, we're basically at the beginning when brands started to take off. I mean, milk is milk is milk is milk. And one day somebody said, well, I put my brand on a bag of milk and sell it for 10 cents more. I mean, it's exactly the same case. Batteries, batteries, batteries. Oh, maybe the Vata batteries are better. And Vata will spend a lot to get into your head to say, well, the next time you order batteries, you order Vata and you don't order batteries. So I think brands are more important.
I mean, the argument of Scott, I follow him very closely, and I think he's right. So, I mean, his arguments kind of is, and he can prove that also with statistics, that the private label share on Amazon, but also in retail in general, goes up. Yeah. So that is, and why he argues that, he basically says reviews have taken over the role of brands as a substitute kind of for signaling. So now he argues, right now you still have like 10 results on the first page of Amazon or whatever it is, 20, and then you look at the reviews, and so but it's still a fairly diverse set. But he argues in voice, you basically say, Alexa, I want batteries, and Alexa will suggest to you, do you want to buy the batteries, whatever, Amazon Basics, they have a 95% 5-star rating, $3.99, and there's even this video of Scott Galloway where he says, no, Alexa, I don't want them, and then I don't have any batteries. Yeah? So they basically, so they are basically saying there's no shelf space anymore in voice. Yeah? That's the argument. And he basically can prove, or the numbers show, the role of the platform, and it's not so much against the brand per se, it's more that the more the power of the platform increases, the less the brand does have even a chance to get in front of the consumer. That's more his argument, and I think that that's unfortunately right, yeah, for the brands. And I think that's why it's critical, and that's difficult if you're a brand like Vata, to be an espresso type brand, yeah, because that's your only way out of it. And that's why I'm saying that the CPG companies, if you look at them very rationally, I'd say 90% of their product have no real product differentiation. Yeah? The only reason why they exist is marketing and distribution power. Yeah? And he's basically arguing that source of margin is going away, and that's 100% right. Yeah? That's why if I would own Procter stock or whatever, I would sell it, I would short it, because on a 10-year time horizon, there's no fucking way that these guys are going to be better off than today. No reason. And if Nestlé is getting more into the Nespresso businesses, they might have a chance. But the likelihood that a startup comes up with this kind of idea, I think, is much higher. The only thing right now that they have is distribution power. And that's something, if you look at Warby Parker, et cetera, a lot of people are talking about Warby Parker. Warby Parker is tiny. Yeah? It's like 180 million revenue and 150 million investment. That's not very capital efficient, and it's still tiny if you compare it to other people that are really big in that space. Yeah? So that's the one thing that startups struggle with, is getting distribution, because that's very expensive. And that's the big advantage that the CPG companies still have. But I think in the midterm, if you're an undifferentiated CPG brand based on media, no way that you're going to keep the margin as it is today. Whether they're dying, I don't know. But if you look at the rise of private label share, especially on Amazon, there's no question that these people are going to lose. And it's 5% already on Alexa of Prime revenues in the US. If that continues, no way that brands are not going to lose. And that's the thing, but that's not because the brands are doing a bad job. That's because of the job that Amazon is doing. Yeah? So, and the only way around it, I think, is getting into a direct relationship with your customer. But how many products are suitable to go into a direct relationship with your customer? All of the CPG traditional brands, you don't care what that is about.
Subscription.
I think you should have a look at Procter & Gamble, because they just announced it, that they will invest massively on one-to-one communications on a mass scale.
Yeah,
I'm very curious how that could be, but I mean, if anybody can put us in place in a massive scale, then it's Procter & Gamble, because
but that's the thing that I would criticize with, like, the Procters, etc. of this world. They haven't been very good at this in the past. Yeah? So, because they don't know anything about the consumer, really, like on a one-to-one scale. And Amazon is in a much better position, I would say, to do that. Yeah? And that's, I think, Procter...
That's a big advantage of Amazon, because they define the interface.
Yeah.
Amazon, Google...
That's not against the brand per se. I think as a startup, you still have to try to build your brand, and especially, but that's what speaks so much for rather providing an experience and not only a very shallow, basically, product. Yeah, so that's what speaks for it, because otherwise you don't have a justification to go into a direct relationship. But I think that's very dangerous for all the CPGs or CPG companies.
Eine Frage hatten wir noch.
Ja?
Naja, hat sich erledigt? Gut.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Hat Spaß gemacht. Vielen Dank.
Absolut.